Here are the supplies we need to make our coffee kombucha. So this is what we'll be doing the ferment in. It's a 1/2 gallon wide mouth ball jar. This is what we'll be using to actually brew the coffee in. We have a nut milk bag and a coffee funnel, and we'll just pour it down into this jar. Here's the coffee we're using. We're using counterculture coffee. We have a cup of ground coffee. We have about 1/2 cup of organic cane sugar. And then the culture we'll be using to get this started is just a regular kombucha culture. We'll be adding the big old SCOBY that's down floating right here. And then this is what we'll be using to boil all water. Alright, so let's show you how to make coffee kombucha. Alright, so we're adding our sugar to the coffee jar that we're going to be putting the coffee in, because you need to dissolve the sugar into the coffee. And we have our water boiling. It is almost done. We are getting the coffee set up. So we just have, the double layer nut milk bag right here. We're going to pour our coffee into the top of it. Okay, so if you have a coffee maker, I would just use that. We don't have one. This is kind of the way we have to do it. Just because this is our situation. Okay, so we have the coffee in the top. The water is done. Making the coffee. We're going to let this drip down a little bit, and then we're going to stir the sugar in to make sure it gets dissolved into the coffee. Okay, so we have the sugar stirred into the coffee, still dripping. This is probably the most time-consuming part of making this. Drip, drip, drip.
I guess you could also do a cold brew.
Oh yeah.
That would probably work.
You wouldn't have to wait for it to cool down.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea. We'll have to try that
Will
sometime.
sugar just dissolve in cold water if you stir it enough, or does it have to...
You can just dissolve it in a little bit of hot water.
Yeah.
And add it in though.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to this.
Yeah. The coffee is made. We have a full quart ball jar of coffee, and we'll remove the top portion here. Alright, so we have our coffee with the sugar in it that's dissolved, and we're going to go ahead and pour this into the vessel we'll be making our coffee kombucha in. Because we used a nut milk bag and it doesn't always work very well, we're just going to filter it through this little colander. So you could see we had some grounds, and there's definitely some grounds down in the bottom. You want to try and minimize the amount of grounds that end up in the actual coffee kombucha, because it's going to make it more bitter. Alright, so we're going to add some cold water into the sweet coffee. And we're going to save some room for the starter liquid and for the SCOBY. You also don't really want to go past the neck of this. So that's a great place. So we're stopping right before 1500 milliliters. Okay. And now we'll stir it in. and let it cool down. You need to let it cool down to room temperature. If you add the culture and the starter tea, the kombucha starter tea, before it's totally cooled down, it's going to be too hot and it's going to kill your culture. So we are going to let this cool down, and we'll check back in and show you the next step once it's cool. Okay, so our coffee has cooled. We use this little laser temperature gun just to be sure. We're at 85 degrees, so we're ready for the next step. So we have here probably like half a cup of kombucha starter tea. So it's my homebrew kombucha that's been fermenting for at least a couple weeks. So we're pouring that in. We're gonna mix it in. Okay, and you want to make sure you're adding starter tea, at least 10% starter tea for the volume of the jar. Adding the starter tea is going to be what changes the pH of the kombucha coffee, so you won't get any mold or anything like that. The starter tea also has all the beneficial bacteria and yeast in it that's going to do the fermenting. Alright, now we're just going to add a SCOBY. This is a SCOBY that we grew for kombucha, so it's in kombucha starter tea liquid right now. Fish it on out. So this culture here, and so once you start using a kombucha culture for coffee kombucha, you couldn't then use this culture for kombucha with tea. So it's going to be a dedicated coffee kombucha now. Alright, and then we'll just put a coffee filter on the top with a rubber band. This just prevents any fruit flies or other critters from getting inside the jar. We're going to let this ferment for 3 to 5 days. We'll taste it after 3 days and see if we like how it's tasting. And if we do, then we will drink it. So because we're using kombucha starter tea instead of, like, say this was like our second batch of coffee kombucha, we would use a starter tea from the coffee kombucha. So this batch is going to be a little more vinegary than our second batch of coffee kombucha. So as this begins to ferment, I'll update you guys and show you what's happening so you know what to look for in your own coffee kombucha. It's been 24 hours since we started our coffee kombucha. It's already forming a SCOBY on the surface of the liquid. If you look at the SCOBY, you can see that there's bubbles under it. That's normal. Right now it smells like sweet coffee, and I'll show you what it looks like tomorrow. 72-hour coffee kombucha update. So the SCOBY is still definitely growing. It's getting thicker. I just tasted my first sip of it. It still tastes a lot like coffee. It doesn't taste a lot like kombucha coffee yet. And we'll see how it's doing tomorrow. Day 4 coffee kombucha update. So you can see that there's starting to be some foam forming under the surface of the SCOBY. Here's what it's looking like inside. And I tasted it, and it is beginning to become more vinegary. Maybe it'll be ready tomorrow. Day 5 coffee kombucha update. So we got more foam under the SCOBY. The SCOBY is really developing. We just tasted it. It still tastes a lot like coffee and not terribly like coffee kombucha. At this point we're thinking we may have made the coffee too strong, or just like it's extra strong, so that's why it's not fermenting as quickly. So we'll see how it's tasting tomorrow. Victory! It is day 7 and the coffee kombucha is finally done. So one sign that it's getting close or it's finished is that there is foam all the way around under the SCOBY. The SCOBY still looks really good, looks healthy, like a well-defined SCOBY. Alright, so let me go ahead and bottle some of this. Okay, here's what we ended up with of our coffee kombucha. We have a quart-sized ball jar and 2 pint ball jars full. In the fermentation jar, I saved enough starter tea and left the SCOBY in there to start the next batch. And let's do a taste test. One more thing I should mention. So once you put a lid on the coffee kombucha, it's going to start to build carbonation inside the jar and could potentially explode. So once it has a lid on it, you either need to be burping it once a day. If you're leaving it on the counter, that I would recommend just keeping it in your fridge. Nothing bad's going to happen if it's in the fridge because it's going to be at a colder temperature. Once it's finished, you could also do a second fermentation with it. I've never tried that with my coffee kombucha. Some people say things like grapefruit juice is really good with the coffee kombucha. If I do second ferments in the future, I'll let you guys know and do an updated video on how to do a second ferment. Okay, 7 days later, I have here my coffee kombucha. Let's give it a taste. So you definitely would have to like both coffee and kombucha to enjoy this ferment. It's kind of just like vinegary vinegary coffee, but I love it. It's so good. And I really appreciate y'all sticking with me through this video. I really hope that you do try making coffee kombucha. And if you do have any questions about the process, anything like that, please just leave them in the comments below and I'll try and get to them. And thanks for watching.